Almost half of the world's population doesn't have any access to the internet. That amounts to 3 billions of people with no internet connection. The situation is not very different in Turkey. The telecommunication companies did a very successful job in the last decade. They connected almost 90% of the population to the World Wide Web. However, the rate of progress slowed down dramatically because the remaining 15 millions of people live in rural and inaccessible areas. It's not profitable for Türk Telekom or other private companies to invest in these regions. So this coverage problem is here to stay. As we were researching the coverage problems, we came across an alternative model called the community networks. The model is increasingly implemented in rural areas around the world, and the Internet Society provides technical and legal support for hundreds of community networks around the world. We talked to the senior policy advisor, Juan Peirano, to understand what community networks are and whether they're a viable solution in Turkey and around the world. Juan, can you talk a bit about your background and the Internet Society, what you guys do?
Yeah, absolutely. I will start with the Internet Society. We are a non-for-profit organization. It was founded by the Internet pioneers roughly 30 years ago. It was funded as a more the civil society part of what is called a ITF, the Internet Engineering Task Force. So we were for many years until recently supporting organization of the ITF. We are basically focused on issues that relate with the internet infrastructure and internet issues. Our mission is basically, and our vision is that we believe that the internet is for everyone. So we want to make it bigger and stronger for everyone. Within those two main avenues of work, we have different projects. I'm particularly involved with projects in the growth side of the house, so infrastructure and growing the internet. I'm a co-lead for the Community Networks project. Within the Internet Society, I'm a senior policy advisor. My background is in telecommunications engineering, so I used to be an engineer and work in very technical areas, especially related with mobile connectivity, but now I move towards the regulatory environment.
Thanks for that. And why do you think there's a need for the community network and the all the activities you do?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great question because if you look at the trends, the connectivity trends that we have globally, especially now that if you take a look at the facts and figures report from the ITU, it shows that we are connecting more people each year, and that's always a good thing. But if you look at the trends and especially the last 20 to 30 years, we started connecting people in a very exponential way, so very rapidly and reaching out to many people. But now we have reached sort of like a plateau in the growth of connectivity each year. So that means that we are not connecting as many people as we used to. But the thing is that we have over 3 million people that are out there that are still not connected. So we are not reaching out to those people, and there is a reason for that, is that those people are in the hardest places to connect. We and the internet industry and operators made a very good job connecting people in urban areas, highly densely populated areas, because they were the easiest to connect and where business cases made sense. But now you have over these 3 billion people that are in rural areas, underserved areas, hard to connect areas in mountainous regions and in the jungles in Brazil, in Nepal, in the high peaks in Nepal. So how do you reach to those people if the business case doesn't make sense? You basically can't, because no one's going to spend money just to lose money. So that's why the work that we do with community networks, what it brings is a complementary, what we like to call a complementary access solution. What this means that you have all the traditional models that work fine if you have a certain level of people that you need to connect, but where those business cases fail, you can rely on community networks. That is basically a a network that is built, maintained, and governed by the people that use that use that network. So that's the complementary model of the traditional
Like,
model.
do you know about the history of the community networks? I mean, I did some research. And
To be fair, it's like we are circling back to the origins of the internet itself, because the ethos of the internet was people, and the internet way of networking is basically people wanting to connect and voluntarily connect, so they organize to connect to the bigger internet. So this is the basis of how the internet works. People wanting to connect, organize themselves to connect to the internet.
but how would you like describe how the model works? Because when I got a feedback for my article, the editors thought it's not doesn't explain it well, because I likened it to the blockchain technology a bit. So I mean, can you do like some? What does it look like? Like in
Yeah,
simple
yeah.
terms?
I would say that community networks like blockchain are two very different and separate things. That makes sense to you.
Yeah, but I thought they're similar in terms of the decentralized method, like
Ah, okay, okay.
in
That
that
was the
sense.
question. Oh, sorry, sorry.
Okay.
No, absolutely, and that's because the internet is it's a decentralized network of networks. So it's there's no single point of failure, and many of the aspects that the blockchain service provides, if you wanted to see like as a distributed network, the internet infrastructure below works exactly the same way. You
Mm.
have networks that connect voluntarily with each other to exchange data, but they don't do it because there is a centralized point that says you need to connect with this one and then bring the IP packet to this other network. All of them have rules, common rules, and common standards that when they come together, they form this network of networks, or this mesh that makes the internet happen on an infrastructure level, if you want to call it.
And what's the how is it different from the regular internet then?
It's not.
No.
That's no. It's not. One of you can argue that some of the community networks, because of their governance model, they want to focus more on, for example, local content, and they build their network, the infrastructure. They build it to provide local content for that only serves that local community, because, for example, they are an indigenous community in the jungle of Brazil, and they want to keep their own ways of their own history and their own ways of living in, and use the internet and the infrastructure to keep those things in the community.
Is it safe to say, to give like an example, like basically community network is like an ISP, but it's owned by the community?
Mm.
Yeah.
That's kind of the more basic way of saying it, right? It's an ISP is usually a private company or a telecom operator, but basically it's the community that owns this internet service
Mm-hmm.
provider.
But I was planning to ask this a bit later, but then I'm also curious about the financial model in which this is sustainable or somehow better than the regular networks, because the one of the reasons why we need the community networks is because it's costly for the big infrastructure companies. So is the community network more like financially stable, or for the customers is it more cheaper, for example?
I think it's definitely cheaper. It's definitely more affordable, because one of in many cases CNs are created because bringing all the infrastructure externally through a big operator is very costly, and then the subscription to that service is way above, for example, the average salary of that community. So the community, what they do is basically they create their own network more affordably, and they later on, when they have it ready, they decide, okay, how are going to maintain this, how we are going to sustain this, because you need to buy either equipment to repair, you need to maintain maybe a salary for the person that goes to your house and fix the router or goes up to the antenna. And that is one of the beautiful things about the community networks is that the communities have decided how to do that. So it's in their own interest to make it sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
And that is why community networks work better than when you have just an influx of money that comes from, I don't know, big development bank that throws $10 million in a rural area, and they deploy infrastructure that no one maintains because no one cares.
I see. I mean, I skimmed through this article called Bottom-Up Connectivity Strategies by Nicola Bidwell. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It talks about a lot of different models as well. So maybe it's a great time to talk about one specific example. I mean, in the article I wrote about the Georgian example in the mountains, it was really an inaccessible area. Maybe if you know the details, that would be great example or anything else.
Yeah, that started in 2018, 2019. I think that's where we got involved with one of the local champions, Ucha Seturi. He's sort of like the director of the operator union back in Georgia, small operator union, and they started and they kickstarted, as I told you, with support from ISOC to develop their first network that initially it was subsidized because they didn't charge for the service, but it was so successful that it started to extend, and the government got involved, the World Bank got involved, so they injected money to make it grow bigger, and now the base of users is big enough to make it sustainable. So each one is they pay a small fee, especially the ones that were connected first, so the ones that got the connectivity at the earlier stages. So there is a form of sustainability that implies that the older users pay a little bit for the newer users, and then that extends and it makes the funds available to keep developing the network itself. But it's a very, I don't want to say basic, but it's a subscription based work.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that's a successful example, and why is that?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely one successful example, and I think it's not only because, I think the local champion and the local people had a lot to do with that, in the sense that they really wanted to make this happen. So it was a very cohesive and very strong community that wanted this to happen, and at the same time, the multi-stakeholder approach that they had, in the sense that they involved businesses, they involved the government, they involved the civil society behind this movement of community networks, that made it much stronger. So that's why it's not because the model itself is sustainable, but how the environment worked together to bring this connectivity to this hardest to reach places. I think it's for sure a success story.
And I think the financial model is very crucial, because that is what is going to distinguish it, whether this is just a contingent fantasy or a real solution to the coverage gap. I mean, most of the models that I've studied, and also the one you mentioned in Georgia, there is either a subsidiary or like a government support, or like they use the infrastructure of a university around.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it is possible to establish a community network without any external support?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's very important also to remind that very big operators are also subsidized. So there are several cases around the world of very big operators that didn't bankrupt because support from the government. So having support from the government is not a bad word, so to speak, and doesn't necessarily imply that your way of governance or your financing mechanism, and how you deal with your financial structure is not valid. I think it's very important that we need to realize that community networks, and Alessandra said it this a few minutes ago, are very similar to a small ISP. So the only difference is that in many cases they are not recognized as a valuable solution, so that's why they are not allowed to be deployed. But you mentioned again that financing mechanisms and sustainability models are definitely very important. And at ISOC and with partners, we have partners APC, I mentioned APC, but also Connectivity Capital and, for example, Connect Humanity. There we are working hand in hand together because we believe that there's a need to find innovative solutions also on the financing sector that are not defined by the traditional models of telecommunication infrastructure. So if you look at most of the models of the business models of telcos nowadays are subscription based, so you pay for a service and they use that money to maintain the network. But when they started, in many cases, because they were financially viable from the start, they got, I don't know, a loan from the bank. If you are a community network, it's very difficult for you to get a loan from the bank, because if you're in a country where community networks are not legally recognized as a network operator, how are you going to go to a bank and say, oh, I need to get a loan? It will be impossible. So there is it's like a domino effect. When you build the enabling environment for CNs to be deployed, everything else opens up. Well, if they had the same rules as the bigger players, I bet they will become sustainable in a snap. So that's why we push very hard for making the regulatory environment for CNs as welcoming as possible, because we believe it's a solution that works. It only needs the right permissions to do so.
So I'm a Turkish citizen, and as I told you before, there's a coverage gap in Turkey. Mm-hmm. Even if you haven't studied the Turkey's case specifically, maybe it would be a great opportunity to spell out the factors that affect whether the community networks can be applied to a specific area. Do you think Turkey, I mean, there's no community networks in Turkey and there's a coverage gap. Do you think it's a viable solution? Okay.
I did some research about Turkey, and I think at this point it's not the environment is not enabling at all. On the contrary, they made recently they diverged from EU regulation. That the EU regulation had some aspects of the regulation was enable especially community-owned networks and cooperative networks, and as far as I understand, in the Turkish case, they diverged from that and they made the licensing regime more strict and more difficult to get. So instead of making them more flexible, they are more strict now. So it will be much difficult to get a license for a community-owned or cooperative operator or something like that. I think the case of Turkey, it's especially because the state operator is so strong, they will not do anything that could harm their own expectations or their own plans. And I think generally community networks work better where you have more an open market based structure in telecommunications. So in the sense that there are options, the community networks can, for example, try to get support for a backhaul from different providers, and not only the state provider be deployed. Yes, Alessandra.
So I just wanted to just kind of touch upon the big thing when Juan had mentioned earlier, enabling environment. That's like critical thing, because the easy part is actually equipment, installing it and what have you, because it's quite simple. But the trick is, and that's why he was giving some examples, Juan gave examples of Brazil and Colombia, is that the governments have to pass certain laws and regulations to allow spectrum that will allow these community networks to operate, because they operate on a different, what do you call it? Spectrum? I can't think of the other word. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, different technologies and different ways of connecting themselves. And
so that's our big challenge. And I know Juan spends an inordinate amount of time is working. We try to work with governments in different countries around the world so that they will have this enabling environment, meaning the regulatory environment will allow for these alternative forms of internet access and, using different spectrums. And so that's the hard part. That's the hard work. The setting up the community network is the easy part. The hard work is getting that the licensing to be able to do that.
Interesting. We'll get into that in the final section as well. We thank Juan for this interesting conversation. You listened to the third episode of the Fract podcast series. In this series, we talk to the researchers around the world who are not satisfied with the apparent and dare to venture inside the fractal. See you in the next episode.